distant dream until we begin to think constructively about change within organizations and institutions. The project of repairing a damaged and broken society is work in progress. In this rehabilitative and recovery project, memories are reproduced to heal, bring justice, and regain moral status in the world with varying degrees of success. A collective experience cannot be forged, nor can a future be envisioned without engaging with our historical past. Historical truths are not uniform. So, in reconstructing a society and rebuilding a nation, I consider it important to take account of the sentiments, values, and motivations of ordinary people, not only decision makers and intellectual elites. To that end, in my book, I examine the healing of national and regional memories of difficult pasts in various parts of the world, internalized by those who long to repair and recover from that legacy of violence and that legacy of persecution. So I had the fortune of meeting with Father Michael Lapsley in Oklahoma City a year
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
And I will tell you a little about that interview, which
Yeah.
I have incorporated into my book. The Institute for Healing Memories was founded by Father Michael Lapsley in South Africa in 1998. And that institute does work to break the cycle of dehumanization by which victims frequently become victimizers. At that institute, they help people they help people to heal in order to restore an enduring dignity, purpose, and hope. And they empower marginalized individuals and communities so they can make new pathways possible by equipping individuals with the emotional tools to retake charge of their own lives. The Institute for Healing Memories delineates its mission, which is to remember the past injustices, ancient, old, and recent, and heal our multiple woundedness, redeem the past through prevention, empowerment, and rehabilitation by celebrating that which is life giving and laying to rest that which is destructive, and collaborating with those who share our vision, which is exactly what I am doing today. Now, Father Lapsley worked with the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which I'm sure some of you have heard of.
Of course, yeah.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa was chaired by Nobel laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu,
Yes, yes.
and Father Lapsley continues to facilitate workshops that are designed to encourage enduring healing individually as well as collectively. So,
Yeah.
as I said, I met him at the Fairview Mission Baptist Church in Oklahoma City in 2019. And Father Lapsley gave an inspirational and motivating talk on forgiving and healing that evening. I was intrigued by the stories that my friends had told me about his impactful journey. Father Lapsley spent a great part of his life combating apartheid in South Africa and the machinery of death of the apartheid state. In 1990, 3 months after anti apartheid revolutionary and political leader Nelson Mandela was released from prison, an extremist group sent a letter bomb carefully placed within the pages of a religious magazine to Father Lapsley in Zimbabwe. Although he survived the bombing, he lost both hands and an eye as a result of the horrific and ghastly blast. One cannot even begin to imagine how traumatic it must have been for him to lose both hands and an eye, but Lapsley's story is one of resilience, not of defeat. His unmitigated commitment to the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa and his tireless crusade against the forces of enmity and bigotry made a restorative impact on me and motivated me to get out of the terrible mood that I was in that evening. Father Lapsley had effectively transformed his trauma, recovered his agent capacities, and gone on to lead a fulfilling life, not as an invalid, but as a whole person, to work toward building a new society on the edifice of transformative justice. So, to give you some context, the evening I attended Father Lapsley's talk, I was particularly distraught because of the grim situation in Kashmir. The autonomous status of Kashmir had been revoked 2 months before I met Father Lapsley, and 8 million people at that point were cut off from the world, including some members of my family. At the time, internet connectivity hadn't been restored in Kashmir, and it was hard to come by authentic information about the gravity of the situation there. So I was becoming increasingly cynical, and I was emotionally tired because of the political paralysis in Kashmir. During the Q&A session after Father Lapsley's talk, I asked him how one could entertain the thought of forging dialogue across enemy lines in the oppressive environments of Kashmir. He replied that when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, he chose to disavow bitterness, rage, and the desire for revenge because he was aware that if he remained embittered and declared war on the apartheid regime, thousands of his supporters would be massacred. Instead, he opted to engage in dialogue with those who had incarcerated him for 27 years. Father Lapsley expressed his solidarity with the people of Kashmir and reminded me to retain my sense of empowerment and agency by showing solidarity with my people and acknowledging their stories. In an email exchange that I had with Father Lapsley a few months later, he emphasized that while a key part of our identity is knowing where we come from and the riches of our past, the problem is when the stories that we are told from the past are filled with poisonous feelings like hatred and bitterness, which then distort the perceptions of the younger generation and keep conflict going for hundreds of years. The good memories, which have the potential to erase hostility and hate, get ruthlessly trampled upon by both victimizers and victims in conflict zones. So, in response to my question about the importance of keeping good memories of a bygone era alive in a war-torn zone, Father Lapsley responded that his notion of the healing of memories is about the journey of acknowledging and beginning to let go of those things in the past that would destroy us and retrieving from the past good memories. He admitted that I asked him a question on how we could channelize the anger of young people in Kashmir and other conflict zones and take the political process forward without being manipulated by vested interests. He acknowledged that that was a challenging question. And his response was that young people would be inspired by older role models who had dealt with their trauma and were able to project a vision of a different kind of world. He noted that the one thing he had learned in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa was how important it is to ask not simply what we are against, but also what we are for. And that response resonated with me because in my writings on Kashmir, I have reiterated that a political movement that pays insufficient attention to the welfare of the populace and rebuilding democratic institutions ends up leaving irreparable damage in its wake. Some political and militant nationalist movements in Kashmir have made the grave error of turning a blind eye to the vitriol of corruption and inefficiency in the administrative setup and educational institutions. So Father Lapsley pointed out to me that everybody is affected by context, just as everyone in South Africa was impacted by its past. But not everybody has to be a prisoner of context or of the past. Real leaders, unlike the politicians we see in several parts of the world, so real leaders are those who have dealt with their own demons or are in the process of doing so. National identity cannot be rebuilt on unquenchable hate for opposing forces, and certainly not on cashing in on the pain and grief of one's own people. In seeking larger political goals, like the right of self-determination in Kashmir, we ignore the mental and emotional health of the people for whom the goal is being sought. So in my book, I argue that even if colonialism and neocolonialism come to an end, those who bear the scars of the cruelties of those phenomena will not be able to lead free, fulfilling, and whole lives unless we learn about trauma at the cerebral level. It is then, Father Lapsley noted, that it can have the potential of leading to introspection, which could help bring about change. We might not always be aware of the degree of woundedness or pain that we have inherited. But once there is that awakening and we come out of denial to take cognizance of how damaged we are, that creates the possibility of healing. So I would like to hear from all of you. I have one more thing to say, but are there any questions, any comments, any statements?
Thank you, Professor Naila. Do you hear me well, right?
I'm sorry?
Do you hear
I
me,
hear
right?
you very well. I
Yes,
hear you
yes, yes.
very well.
Thank you for this fruitful lecture. I want to say I have a few comments before I let the audience and my students to ask you a few questions.
Absolutely.
By the way, I lived in India for 10 years. I traveled to India in 1990 and left
Yes,
India in 2000,
I
and I
see.
am familiar with the problem of Kashmir.
Yes,
Now,
yes,
and I know that Kashmir is cut off from the world after
yes,
the radical policies of Modi in India, because
yes,
India is going radical these days, and
yes,
especially with the citizenship and who will be a citizen and
yes, yes,
targeting Muslims. And
yes, yes,
Kashmir is the core of the problem now and
yes, yes,
supported by the policies from abroad we are all familiar with. The world is
yes,
going radical and to the right, and we are trying to redeem that world to the center now as we are witnessing the elections in America.
yes, that
And
is correct.
now, and now you are taking example of South Africa, and that is very interesting. I wrote about South Africa, familiar with the struggles of against the apartheid, and I wrote research on Atul Fugard about, in a drama about the plight of black South Africans living in South Africa. I want to ask you a question. What do you think of the future of Kashmir? That is the first question. What do you think of the status of Kashmiri women? Because Kashmiri women are not different from the Palestinian women.
Yes,
They have
yes,
their own challenges, social
yes,
challenges when it comes to freedom,
yes,
rights, equality with males. That is one front. And the second, when they fight for their freedom as the human beings under occupation, looking for self-determination. So we
yes,
have now double challenges for the
yes,
women, and I
yes,
think there is a lot of similarity between women
yes,
in Kashmir, women in Afghanistan, women in Palestine, women
yes,
in Iraq. They are fighting for, on more than one front, but the
yes,
question, the priority will be for whom? For
yes,
nationalism or for the rights and freedom of women? That
yes,
is, and I liked what you said. Victims become victimized, and that is right, because after the withdrawal of colonial powers from former colonies, we were unable to lead, and that is seen by the failed examples of countries who failed to lead after the withdrawal of colonial powers because we become victimizers. And
yes,
now the process of healing is important, and as you said, concluded that traumatized people cannot lead, and leaders can lead and save their people. But the question is, in case of Kashmir, how can we talk about reconciliation and the conflict is not resolved? In Palestine, how can we talk about reconciliation when the conflict is still going on? In South Africa, it can happen because we witnessed an end to the apartheid and to that regime. Here,
yes,
These are my remarks. Yes.
Excellent, excellent comments as well as questions.
Thank you.
So, my book entitled Islam, Women, and Violence in Kashmir
Yes.
was published in the United States in 2010.
Yes.
And in that book, I have written at length about the political, cultural, and religious struggles of Kashmiri women.
Yes.
Kashmiri society, much like society in Palestine, Afghanistan,
Iraq. Yeah.
etc., Iraq,
Mm.
is conservative. It is traditional, and to a large extent patriarchal as well.
Yes. Yes. That is true.
So it is a struggle for women to assert themselves
Yes.
politically as well as socioculturally. Now, Kashmir has, and like Palestine,
Yes.
has an old history, an old civilization. And in the 1930s and the 1940s,
Yes.
when Kashmiris were fighting against the monarchy,
Yes.
against monarchical rule, Kashmiri women stood shoulder to shoulder
Yes.
with their male counterparts
Yes.
to create a nationalistic consciousness,
Yes.
to create an identity, a national identity. Even during, 1947, 1948, when the rest of India was fighting against British occupation,
Yes.
Kashmiris at that point, as I said, were in the process of creating a sense of selfhood, a sense of identity, particularly the Muslims of
Yes.
the region,
Yes.
because the Muslims of the region had been marginalized by the monarch.
Yes.
So it was a struggle for them to come out of the abyss of poverty and out of the abyss of illiteracy.
Yes.
In 1947, we had some remarkable women in Kashmir,
Yes.
Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, who
Yes.
came together. And in the process of building a nation, reconstructing a society, those women played very constructive roles.
Yes.
So, in reviving a cultural identity. So, we have these incredible role models in Kashmir.
Yeah.
Now, in the current situation, Kashmiri women are caught in a double bind. So, on the one hand, you have militarization,
Yes.
which is oppressive. And on the other, you have you see religious discourse. One kind of religious discourse is emancipatory, but there is another kind of religious discourse that is oppressive,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That seeks to reinforce traditional, very restricted gender identities and gender roles.
Yes.
So women in Kashmir are caught between that double bind.
Yes.
The forces of militarization on the one hand,
Yes.
and the forces of militancy on the other.
Yes.
Neither of which give women adequate space
Space, right?
within which to assert themselves, within
Yes.
which to assert their identities.
Yes.
Now, I went to a Catholic school, as I mentioned a little while ago,
Yes.
and I was raised in a traditional Muslim home
Yes.
where I was taught that Islam was an emancipatory religion.
Yes.
That as a Muslim woman, my religion gave me the right to assert my political opinions.
Yes. Right.
That my religion gave me a sense of dignity, self respect,
Yes.
gave me the right to inherit property,
Yes.
gave me the right to run for political office,
Yes.
and gave me the right to seek respect in
Yes.
cultural spaces as well.
Right.
That is the Islamic discourse within which I was raised.
Yes.
But today, in several Muslim countries and Muslim societies, we are seeing a distortion
Mhm.
of Islamic
Yes.
discourse.
Right.
We are seeing
Radicalism. Right. Yeah.
radicalism. We are
Yes.
seeing misinterpretations
Mhm.
of the Quran, right?
Mhm.
Of scripture. So,
Politicizing, politicizing Islam.
absolutely, political Islam,
Yeah.
which, so that political Islam can be oppressive,
Yes.
sometimes just as oppressive as the forces of militarization. And
Yes.
you see, in very conservative societies, particularly in conflict zones, and I'm sure you see this in Palestine as well,
Yes. Yes.
Native women are treated as repositories of culture and tradition. You see, Native women are seen as the ones who pass down culture and tradition to the younger generation. That is their only role. So if a Native woman is violated
Yeah.
by enemy forces, that is seen as the violation of the entire community,
Yes.
of the entire society,
Yes.
and as the symbolic emasculation of the men of that community.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the point that I'm trying to make is that rape is used as a weapon of war in
Yes.
conflict zones,
Yes.
right?
Right. Right.
So that categorization of Native women as repositories of tradition and culture is very difficult because it doesn't give women the space to
Mhm.
explore their own potential,
Yeah.
to build their own identities. It restricts them
Yes.
to that space of protecting
Define them in
tradition.
one corner. Yes.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. It pigeonholes them.
Pigeonhole. Pigeonhole them. Right.
Yes.
Right.
So
Right.
that is my response to your question about women. Your other question about how can we how can we envision
Mhm.
reconciliation in conflict zones? I think that's an excellent question.
That is going on. Yeah. I
That is
mean,
going on. That is
on.
going on. So over the years since 1989, so over 3 decades now, Kashmir has witnessed egregious human rights violations. Kashmir has been lost. Young people have suffered terribly because of, loss of lives, loss of physical security, loss of emotional security. So young people are traumatized. There is unemployment, there is joblessness, and people are very vulnerable, right? So the kind of politics that the kind of politics that I support is one that is not built on the miseries of our own people. I do not want to see the people of any conflict zone wallowing in misery forever and ever. There
Yes.
are people in Kashmir and other conflict zones who have built their castles on the sufferings of their own people. And that kind of politics to me is highly questionable. In conflict zones, we require a politics of construction. We need to rebuild our own communities. We need to rebuild our own societies.
Yes.
You see, what we witness in conflict zones is militarization. Militarization causes fragmentation
Yes.
of societies. So within Kashmiri society, for instance, there is a trust deficit between Kashmir and mainland India. Yes.
Yes.
There is a trust deficit even within Kashmiri society.
Yeah.
People are suspicious of one another. People are distrustful of one another. And oppressive forces exploit that mistrust within communities. They exploit that suspicion within communities. So I think it's important to cultivate the empathy, to listen to one another's stories. It is important to cultivate the empathy to understand where the other person talking with you or addressing you is coming from. We need to rebuild our own communities, and that is a challenging task in conflict zones, but it has to be done. And that is the only way we can empower our young, right? So while I think it is incredibly difficult, close to impossible, to talk about reconciling with enemy forces.
Yes.
In order to rebuild our communities and reconstruct our nations, we need to forge dialogue within our own communities.
Yes.
And then with enemy forces. That even within our own communities, we require consensus building.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, 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 it is clear.
That makes
Yeah, it is
yeah.
clear. Any one of you want to ask the Professor Naila any question?
And you don't have to ask a question, make a comment. I would love to hear about your experiences. I would like to know more about your perceptions.
Please write any question or anyone want to speak. I will give him, the chance to speak.
Yes, please.
Don't feel shy. Come forward, our students are always shy. You have to
I
put them, that is it.
Well, you have to have the confidence to speak up.
Yes.
That is important, to be able to
Uh,
voice your opinions.
Professor Naila, tell me about your time in America. When did you come to America and why Oklahoma? And why?
So I came to America in 1998 because I was very keen on pursuing
In
a PhD.
1998, yes. Mhm.
1998.
Yeah.
I was very keen on pursuing a PhD in this country.
Yes.
And I have a cousin in Oklahoma who
Yes.
has been here over 40 years.
Yes.
So my husband and I came to this state first, and we stayed with my cousin for about a month while I took my GREs, TOEFL,
Yes. Yes.
etc.
Yes. 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 Yes.
And you see, because in 1998, I had no friends in America, I
Yes.
wanted to be close to the one member of my family who was here. Not that that makes a difference, because at the end of the day, you are on your own and you have to fight your own battles and your own
Yes.
struggles. But
Yes.
emotionally, it was good for me to know that I had a family member close by.
Yeah.
So I chose to go to the University of Oklahoma. And honestly, to be very
Mhm.
honest with all of you, intellectually, I keep Oklahoma because it was there that I was given the chance to explore my
Yes.
politics,
Yes.
to explore my ideology, to interrogate my ideology.
Yeah.
And I found the most incredible research material at libraries across the United States
Yes, yes, you're right.
that enabled me to write my
Right.
sixth book. So
Yeah.
the book that is coming out now is my sixth.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Naila, I lived in USA. I was a scholar at SMU, Southern Methodist University, Dallas, for 2 years. I
It's
was there.
very
It's
close to where
very
I live.
close. Yeah, you know, very close. I was there in 2010 and I
Yeah,
left 2012. And from that time, I did not get out of Gaza. And as you
mhm.
said, America gives you an opportunity to research and to explore many opportunities
Yes,
over
yes,
there.
yes,
Yeah, yeah, it is a very
yes,
good place, you know, especially for
yes,
academic people to
yes, yes,
work and to produce, you know, great books and
yes,
great
yes,
academic work. We
yes.
have a
And
question for you. Please,
what, just a moment, Professor
Sam.
Shahada, just
Yes.
real quick. I did my first master's at the University of Delhi, and the kind of literature that I studied at the University of Delhi was canonical British and American literature. It was in America that I was encouraged to study South Asian literature. And
Wow.
it was in America that I was encouraged to write my MA thesis and PhD dissertation on the rise of religious fanaticisms in
Yes,
South Asia.
yes.
It was here that I was encouraged to undertake that project.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They
So,
encourage you to do a lot of things because,
yes,
especially when you come from areas like,
yes,
you know, India, Kashmir, Palestine, they
yes,
want to know about your area and your culture,
absolutely,
and
absolutely,
will not, you know, be more suitable than you. So when
absolutely.
I stayed in Dallas, I was working on Arab women writers whose works are
Yes,
translated into English, and you
yes,
know lots of my work is on the feminist works, you know, of Arab
yes,
women writers and Western women writers. We have a
yes.
question now. We have a question first from Sarmad. Thank you very much, Professor Isam and Naila. It is really a great chance to see such a wonderful teacher like Naila talk to us. My question is, do you think the dominance of man over woman has its roots in nature?
Oh, that
It's a big
that's
question.
an excellent question, Sarmad.
Uh,
Um, I think gender identities are
mhm.
social constructs,
Yes, constructed.
sociocultural constructs. I don't think there is anything innate about gender identities. So, you know, Sarmad, in Kashmiri society or Palestinian society, when we talk about masculinity or femininity, we have a particular notion of what masculinity means or what femininity means. In America, the notion of masculinity is quite different. So these are sociocultural constructs. You
Yes.
know, what is masculinity? What is femininity? Today, I have students uh, who have non binary gender identities, or I have students who are transgenders, you know, so that is something that I have to cope with. And I'll tell you very honestly, when I first came to America in 1998 and I first started teaching, I was very conventional, very traditional. And if a student would talk with me about his sexual orientation, I would flinch. I would think, oh my goodness. But you see, that's because any kind of gender identity really is a sociocultural construct. In Kashmir, for instance, uh, students would not talk openly about their sexual orientations.
Yes.
But in American society, students are a lot more open about such things.
Yes. Right.
But to answer your question, I think it's very cultural. Male dominance, patriarchy, um, and I think we need to build communities and we need to build societies where women and men respect one another's voices, one another's opinions, because a healthy society cannot be built if you ignore the opinions, sensibilities, and needs of the female
Yes.
population.
You are right.
So that is how we build a holistic society,
Yes.
by recognizing and giving
The
women their space,
potentials of women, right?
right, their legitimate space.
We
There
have.
is, I'm sorry, Professor Shahada.
Oh,
So
good.
a long time ago,
Yes.
Abraham Lincoln said
Yes.
that a house divided against itself
Yes.
cannot stand.
Yes. Right.
See, which is why it is important for those of us who are from conflict zones and who live in conflict zones
Yes.
to bring every stakeholder to the table, every stakeholder in our respective communities to the table must have a voice. And we need to build consensus within our own communities. That's how we can speak to opposing forces from a position of strength. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Thank you. We have a question here from
Professor
Ula.
Shahada, I have my next meeting at 12:20. It is 12:10 my time.
Uh-huh.
So I would be happy to take one last question.
Yeah, this is the last question.
Okay.
I would like to thank you, Professor Isam and Naila. I am very happy to have. No, okay. I am very happy to have the chance to be with you. My question is that the big gap between cultures, I mean, if someone wants to complete his study in Kashmir, especially if she is a female. Yeah.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, the question, she's asking about the big gap between cultures and if she thinks if she can study in Kashmir,
A woman.
a woman.
Okay, okay.
Hmm.
I think that is a very good question. So
Yes.
while I was growing up in Kashmir,
Mhm.
there was a lot of emphasis on female literacy,
Yes.
as well as the professionalization of women.
Yes.
So the rate of female literacy in Kashmir, even today,
Mhm.
is relatively high,
Yes.
right? Kashmir, before before the resurgence of religious fundamentalism in mainland India,
Mhm.
Modi's Hindutva,
Yes.
militarization, militancy, etc., Kashmir had come a long way.
Yes.
And Kashmiri women were relatively emancipated.
Yes.
And as I said, there was a lot of emphasis on quality education, going to good schools, going to good colleges. Um, Women have their challenges culturally
Yes.
because even today, as I said, the society is patriarchal. Women are expected to thrive in traditional cultural and gender roles.
Yes.
So, as daughters, wives, mothers, keepers of home and hearth. But despite that, women do go to universities, they go to colleges. I think a lot more work needs to be done at academic institutions to give women a voice.
Yes.
As I said, the women students I interacted with at various academic institutions in Kashmir were intelligent and they were curious and they were inquisitive, but they were not encouraged to speak up.
Out.
They were not encouraged to voice their opinions. So, this
Yes.
one college that I went to, the male students sat on one side of the hall and the female students sat on the other side of the hall. And at the end of my lecture, I said, "Are there any questions?" Now, the male students had a lot of questions. The female students said nothing. So I turned to them and I said, "There are so many female students here, but not one of you has asked me a question." And one of the boys said, "We want them to speak up. Why don't they say something?" So a female student responded, she said, "Because all my life, people like you have told me that I am stupid, that I have no intelligence. So now I don't have the confidence to speak up."
Yes.
You see, so I think we need to create those cultural spaces where women feel comfortable enough and feel safe enough speaking up. For instance, in the political realm in Kashmir, there is a lack of women politicians. There is a lack of women policymakers. And because there are so few women politicians or women policymakers, they get stereotyped very easily. You see? And they feel the pressure to toe the masculinist line. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Thank
So
you.
yeah,
I know that your time is tight, but I think also the culture of fear and the culture of defining women in one corner in Kashmir or in Palestine or another country, which restrict
yeah,
the freedom of women to speak up and to come forward. But
yeah,
I think the road is still long, just for to produce or to make tangible achievement. I would like to
yes.
thank you for coming for us today and to speak to my students this fruitful lecture. And I will invite you again. We will speak next time about colonialism, post-colonial literature. I will invite you surely to talk about, one of these issues.
Inshallah,
Inshallah.
inshallah. And I would like to say that this was a pleasure. I thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. I wish all of you well, and I wish all of you a healthy and constructive future. And I hope young people in Gaza, Palestine, as well as young people in Kashmir are able to rebuild their communities. I hope all of us are able to heal and prosper and grow. So God bless you all. By the way, Iman, my daughter's name is Iman. So I have your namesake right here in my home.
Yes, yes. Thank you. But I will
All
tell
right.
you one thing. I will YouTube this session, this lecture, and I will send you the link, after we finish.
Okay.
And I tag to you the pictures of that session, on your website now. Thank you a lot to Professor Naila, and I hope that we can meet again in the coming future. Thank you a lot.
I hope so too. Thank you
Stay
very
safe
much.
from COVID-19. Stay safe. God bless you.
God bless you too. Ma salama.
Ma salam. Thank you.